Today I'm going to tell you about a real serial killer in my family. My most covered song, and why, if I had to do it again, I might have done it differently. Every song deserves to be written, but not every song needs to be shared. And this is something that I've learned in my 20 years of being a songwriter. And I've had notebooks full of songs that never saw the light of day. I honored the muse however she showed up, but I didn't necessarily need to share those songs with the world. This might have been one of those songs, even though it's been a great success for me. This is my grandmother, Pauline Barfield. She was born Pauline Stubbs in about 1920. I never knew her. This is Pauline's great-grandson and my son, Rowan. He's about the same age Pauline was when she left school to help take care of her family. Pauline told my mother that she stood on a step stool to stir pots on the stove. This is her engagement ring and wedding band. They're about a size 4. That's pretty small. This is her Bible. I'm not sure why these things came to me, but I'm glad they did. Look at her handwriting. It's beautiful. It reminds me that you can't judge people by their education. This is Pauline with my grandfather, Jennings Lafayette Barfield. Jennings had less school than Pauline did. He became crew leader of a plumbing crew at Fort Bragg, the largest Army base in the world, during a time of exponential growth for the U.S. military. I didn't know him either, though I've seen a picture of him holding me when I was a baby. His hands were like salad bowls, as big as Pauline's were small. I can imagine how beautiful it was when they held hands. I love that they found each other. Pauline and Jennings raised 6 children. Ellen, Christine, that's my mother, Patrick, Becky, Rodney, and Nancy. My Aunt Becky was the first female duty officer of a male barracks. She was part of the U.S. Army's efforts to integrate women into combat roles, and she was stationed at Fort Lewis in Washington State. Some of my favorite childhood memories were when the Barfield family got together for Christmases and sometimes Thanksgiving. My Uncle Rodney played Santa Claus. He studied Russian history and went to the USSR when it was definitely behind the Iron Curtain. He sold his own blue jeans on the black market and smuggled home a real Russian icon. He's also an author, and one of my favorite books of his is called America's Forgotten Caste, Free Blacks in Antebellum, Virginia, and North Carolina. He paints a breathtaking picture of the time. I'll leave an Amazon link in the description. I know you're here to hear a story about a serial killer. I'm getting to that. My Uncle Pat was a colonel in the Army. When he was dying of lung cancer, he told everybody what he wanted and how he wanted to go. And that's what happened. He also knew about 5 chords and at least 1,000 songs. He was always surrounded by great bluegrass musicians because he always knew another song to play. I remember him pulling out a box full of notebooks, each one filled with lyrics of songs that he'd learned. He sold insurance in Mount Airy, which is home to one of the best old-time and bluegrass festivals on the planet. My mother is an artist. Here's a painting that she made of me when I looked like that guy in Eastbound and Down. She's quite versatile. She works in acrylics and watercolors. My mother is very devout, and this is the table where we eat, and this is her deceased husband's Bible. She also loves a good murder mystery. And doesn't everybody? Just not one in your own family. The reason I never met Pauline was because she died of a brain aneurysm when she was 49 years old. My mother said she got a headache and laid down in the bed and died one day. Jennings was terribly heartbroken. And there was a woman who was a friend of the family, ostensibly. Her name was Velma Bullard. She was somewhat of a caretaker, and my grandfather, Jennings, had what they call COPD these days. Back then they called it emphysema, but chronic bronchitis and emphysema. He had some health problems. About 6 months after my grandmother, Pauline, died, my grandfather married Velma. There was one child still living in the house. I think she was maybe 17 years old, 16 years old. That was Nancy. And she said she always felt guilty because he asked her if it was okay to marry Velma. He asked her for her blessing. What a great dad. And she gave it to him. It wasn't even a year later that my grandfather got sick and passed away, which was not unexpected. He did have a lot of health problems. And Velma disappeared from my family's life. But 8 years later, she was taken in for questioning in the poisoning death of a man named Stuart Taylor. He was a fairly young man and healthy, and someone put in an anonymous call to the sheriff's department about all the people who had died around Velma. An elderly couple she was caring for, her own mother, Stuart Taylor, my grandfather. Her own son drove her to the police department, and I've heard that he never got over that either. She confessed to killing Stuart Taylor and several others, although she did not confess to killing my grandfather because the statute of limitations had passed. It had been more than 7 years. But my grandfather's body was exhumed, and they did discover that he was poisoned with arsenic, the same way as everyone else had been. It was pretty clear that Velma had killed my grandfather. Velma was the last woman to be executed in the state of North Carolina on November 2nd, 1984. The first, for context, was Frankie Silver. I learned about this story in 1984 when I saw that on the news there was a woman being executed in North Carolina, and her name was Velma Barfield. Now, if her name had been Byrd, there's a lot of Byrds on this side of the Mississippi. But I don't know any other Barfields. I know there are some out there, but my family are the only ones I've ever personally met. I thought, that's interesting. Because everybody loves a good murder mystery, but not when it's in your own family. And my family never told me. When I was making my first record, it's called Wildflowers, and I just recently put it out to streaming services, I helped my friend Jerry Brown build a studio, and we bartered my construction skills for his engineering skills, and over about a year and a half, we made a record. Well, we were sitting on a pile of wood having a cup of coffee one morning, and I told him that story that I just told you. And he said, "You mean to tell me you ain't written a song about that yet?" And he sent me home to write the song. It took me a long time to write that song. I found a book that Velma had written while she was on death row. It was called Woman on Death Row. There were other people who had written books, and they always wanted to interview my family, and my family didn't really want to talk about it. So I thought, even if her book is biased, at least it's a first-hand account. So I read as much as I could, and I absorbed it, and at the same time I was absorbing old-time music, which is sort of like pre-bluegrass social music. So anybody can play old-time. If you have a a comb and some wax paper and you can make a sound, you can be in the band. And bluegrass was really when fantastic musicians and performers took old-time music and turned it into a performance style. So in old-time music, often these old ballads were like the news. So if someone was murdered, it would be turned into a song. There were often very few chord changes, there were no bridges, there often wasn't a chorus, there was just what they called strophic form, which is one verse after another that tells the story. So eventually that's the way that I wrote this song. I came up with the melody, and I remember finally locking into the melody and the words when I was sitting waiting to rehearse with my friend Leo Lorenzoni at High-Strung Instruments in Durham off of 9th Street. He was on the phone with somebody, and in about the 10 minutes that he was on the phone, I actually wrote most of the song. But it wasn't like it took me 10 minutes to write it. I mean, I studied it for months. Everything just kind of landed in that 10 minutes. So I went back to Jerry Brown's and I recorded it, just me and my guitar, one take, bang, just did it. And that's how it is on the record. I'll put a link to the record in the description. And if you want one, join my Patreon, patreon.com/JonathanByrdMusic, and I'll send you one in the mail. Well, that story and that song got around pretty quickly. And the next thing I know, Jack Lawrence, who used to play guitar with Doc Watson, fantastic guitar player, singer, he was in the studio making his record. Jerry played the song for him. Jack Lawrence recorded it. Sam Bush played this beautiful slide resonator mandolin on it. Somehow Larry Keel heard it. Larry Keel started playing it. I've heard it played by people I don't even know. And it's a good story. But when I learned the story, it was an impersonal story. I heard it on the news. To my family, it was a very personal story. It was something that they didn't want to talk about. It was something that they didn't want to put out to the world. And my Aunt Nancy was either the most upset with me, or maybe she was just the one who was able to talk to me about it. She was only 17 when her father died, and she had to move in with one of her siblings for a while. And what she told me was, the killer always gets to tell their story. Even if they're dead, somebody tells the killer's story. They don't tell the story about this family who loved each other, this family that accomplished so much together and separately. They don't tell you what was lost. These are only a few of the people who were personally impacted by these murders. The true number is probably in the thousands. So today, I'm not going to tell you Velma's story. I'm not going to show you a picture of Velma. I'm not going to play the song. You can go listen to the song. I'm proud of the song. I'm proud of that record. If I had to do it again, maybe I would have done it differently, and maybe it's good that I don't get a chance to do it again. I called all the living siblings. Of course, my mom is right here. And I asked them if it was okay to make this video. I said I wanted to make a video to make up that difference, to tell the story of the family and the love and what was lost. And I hope I've done that today. And I hope that if you've got a dark story in your family, I want you to write that. I think it's so important to write it. I think it's important to honor and respect the muse, however she shows up. But I do want you to think twice about recording it and putting it out to the world. I do want you to talk to your family about it if you can. Everybody's situation is different. Every song deserves to be written, and every true story deserves a little bit of deliberation. I wish I had had that kind of empathy when I was 29 years old. I feel like I've come a long way. Thanks for listening to my story. Please support me on patreon.com/JonathanByrdMusic. I put out free songwriting education here on YouTube and on every social media that I'm on. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, and don't forget to write.
How was that?
That was good, Mama. That was good. You want to play one more?